my name's Kelvin and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial for Procreate. So in today's project, I'm going to show you how to make these really loose, kind of abstract architectural illustrations. And this is a really practical technique because we're basing this off of a real photo. So if you happen to be in a cafe, you could just take your iPad out front, snap a picture, go back inside, and then make a cool little illustration just from that photo. Now I'm going to start out here with a blank watercolor paper texture, and in this case it's the St. Petersburg texture, and I'll put links in the description. And brushes, I'm mostly going to be using the regular brush kit, and I'll put links to that one as well. And also I'm going to use the Scratchy Pens brush kit, and this is a free brush kit I've mentioned in previous videos, but it's basically just 4 brushes, and they're all very different, but they're all basically black ink pens. And I think the old Micron is my favorite, but all the other ones will work. They'll just have a sort of different appearance. Now I recommend turning off the streamline, so if you just select the brush so it's blue and then tap it again, it'll open up the brush settings. And if you look under stroke path and then stroke properties here, I recommend taking streamline to 0 because this is going to smooth out your strokes, but we don't want smooth strokes. We want a very loose, very abstract illustration, and I think I like the sort of random movements that you get when you draw with the pencil. I don't want them to be smoothed over. So then just click done to sort of apply those. And now we can start here. So I've got my picture already pasted in there and it's set as the very top layer. I'm gonna lower the transparency, maybe 30%, something like that, just so I can barely see it, but it's not distracting me. And then I made another layer above that photo. And this is where I'm gonna do my ink illustration. So with that brush, in this case the old Micron brush, and with pure black, I'm just going to go over this and create a loose kind of outline of the major features. So I'm happy with my ink outline, and I've sort of gone back and forth between adding fine details and broader details, and I guess that's the only trick. And what I mean by that is I spent a little bit more time adding detail to the plants because they're more interesting to me. Also the windows, the door handle, and the bike, but everything else is much looser, and I think that style, it looks best in my opinion. Now I can go ahead and turn off the photo and get a better look at this. Now, if you want to add color, you can just do it from memory and just do it like any of my other watercolor illustrating techniques. But I recommend placing the photo to one side. So the way I do that is I'm going to move the sketch first. So let me use the arrow tool and I'll move this off to the side here, just like that. And then I'm going to grab the photo, turn that on, raise the opacity back to 100%, and I'm going to use the arrow tool on that one and just move that one over here and maybe shrink it, maybe squish it a little bit actually, because I don't really care about the proportions anymore. I just want to use it as a reference for the colors, so that'll work fine. And then I can start coloring it by selecting a blank layer underneath the paper texture. And I recommend starting out by coloring in the details first, and then as you go on, start adding color to the more sort of abstract, broader and broader kind of elements. So I'm going to start painting this by painting the plants, and then after that I'm going to move on to the windows and then the sort of broader structure. So after I've got the main colors laid down, it ended up being 3 different layers, and it was just because, like, you know, I wanted to do the green on a different layer because sometimes I want to adjust the hue of that later on. Same with the blue. I think the hue of that is really important, and if I get it wrong, it's hard to fix that. But when it's on a different layer, I can just shift the hue. and then I did the main loose kind of background elements on yet another layer. So what I decided is, at this point, it looks like my green stuff is a little bit dark, I guess, so I do want to shift the hue of that. But I'm happy with the blue here, so I'm just going to grab the green layer here, and I'm going to go to the hue, saturation, and brightness. And I think I'll just play with that, play with the hue, and try to find a slightly better looking shade of green. So there we go. I think this kind of olive green shade is just a little bit better. Now once you're 100% happy with all the colors, just merge the layers together and then do some blending with the water blender. I think you should go in there kind of at a pretty small size, like 20%, and don't get carried away with this. But what happens when you do rapid, loose watercolor illustrations is some of the colors will blend together. So just look where you have some extreme colors, and then you can blend those. So in this case, I have the blue and the brown. I think it will look good if I just kind of soften that up a little bit. But don't be afraid to use a smaller size blender and create some kind of watery, kind of flowing patterns like this. Now, I think this area is worth pointing out because there's a little bit of a technique that can increase the watercolor realism. And you'll notice I have the white sort of between these two very different colors. Now, I think what looks nice is if you blend wherever they touch. So for example, this white area, I want to try to leave that alone because that's just a natural kind of watercolor mistake. But where these two colors touch, I'm going to blend those a lot like this. And then I'm going to look along that edge, and just wherever else it happens to touch, I'll try to sort of mix those colors across that. And that makes it look a lot more realistic. Now, once I'm happy with the blending, I think it's a good idea to add some kind of color variation. So the way I usually do that is I'll just use the selection tool and set it to freehand. And I want to make sure I'm on the layer with all the colors. And I'll just make a random selection like this. Then I'll feather that out just a little bit. I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness for that layer. And then I'll just slightly shift the hue and just play around with some of the saturation and brightness until I kind of have a kind of interesting secondary tone kind of getting added in. So that looks pretty good. One thing I do notice is I think I need to add a shadow because right here under that awning, there's kind of a dark area, whereas here it doesn't have that at all. So I think I'll just use the selection tool to add that in. So I'll use the freehand setting here and just make a selection like this. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness for that whole layer and just darken that area kind of selectively. And if you do have a weird area that doesn't quite look right, it might be worth going back over it with the water blender and just softening that up a little bit. So this is pretty much done. I think I want to merge everything together now, so I can get rid of the photo, so I'll go ahead and turn that off. And here's the sketches, the ink outline. I think I'll move that down here, and then I can just merge that together with our illustration, just so it's all on one layer, so it's all easier to manage. And I can go ahead and position this kind of in the middle of my artboard. And now is where you could choose to add some splatters. I think it's a nice look. It adds a little bit of kind of interesting, kind of spontaneous detail. So the way I recommend to do that is to just make a new layer above your artwork. And I'm gonna select the Paint Flicks brush, and that's in the pumpkin brush kit. And this is a brush kit that I give for free in the previous video where I painted the pumpkin, but I'll also put a link to download this kit in the description down below. And it just has this really nice brush that's good for grunge and splatters. So I'm gonna set the color here to a pretty dark color, and on that separate layer above the artwork, I'm just gonna sort of brush this around just a little bit like that. In my opinion, it looks better if you set the transparency mode to color burn, but that does have some problems, so I'll try my best to explain that. So if you set the transparency mode of the splatters to color burn, they'll only show up on the artwork. It won't show up on the white background, which can be really nice, but there's kind of a trap that you can fall into, or a mistake that happens. So there's kind of a bug right now in Procreate with color burn, and watch what happens if I merge the splatters. It loses the color burn effect. So if you're going to use color burn, use that kind of sparingly and realize that you cannot merge a color burn layer with a layer set to normal, because then it'll revert back to normal or maybe multiply or something like that. So it's good to use color burn only as a kind of last step just before you export your artwork. So there we go, this one is all done and I'm really satisfied with the way it turned out. One thing that I like about this process here is it's very fast. I mean, I gotta slow down when I'm making a video, but in real life, if you're just doing a sketch in a cafe, you can do this in like 5 minutes or less. And as you can see here, it prints out really nicely. So that pretty much wraps it up. You can find links to all the materials, brushes, textures I used in the description down below. And as always, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.